feeling stuck lately? Like life's passing you by? Get to know M.A.Y.A.
Acronym My Ambition, Your Ambition.
Reconnect with your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. Find your motivation and start to live the life you desire. Explore the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast at M.A.Y.A.Akai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. This is episode 19, one away from 20. Boy, I've been pretty consistent since I've started this, so thank you. If you happen to be a new listener to the show, well, buckle up for safety. Just kidding. Of course, my returning users, you know how this works. It's all about, M.A.Y.A is about fresh forward thinking to salient topics, and the whole goal as we work to get to the best version of you is to take away that fear of, pulling back that veil of self-doubt and self-sabotage, which plagues many of us, but ultimately it keeps us from achieving the things we really want to do. So what we work for here is we talk about that best version of you. It's about harnessing that motivation to help you yield the satisfaction that you want, not just for life, but I'm like daily living, because everything is cumulative. I want us to think about it day by day and not just larger scopes of happiness. Happiness is built day by day. So that's the key thing. So that's what M.A.Y.A is all about. Normally I say things like, it's our 45 minutes to an hour together. So, grab your beverage of choice, but it is Thursday at 2 p.m. So chances are you might be at work. So you're probably drinking tea or coffee, but if you happen to be home, grab that spot where it's quiet, where this can be you and me time, mainly more like you time. So we can really jump into talking about episode 19's topic. Now, before we do that, of course, I have to do my housekeeping things. Remember, if you're happen to be still back on episode 13 or 14, I'm okay with that. Remember, M.A.Y.A is about working at your own pace. And of course, you can always find past episodes of M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A.Akai.com, or you can always subscribe to my YouTube channel, and all of the episodes can be found there, M.A.Y.A Akai. Of course, if you happen to have a podcast platform of choice, I won't hold that against you. You can listen that way as well. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and now on Amazon Audibles as well. Just search M.A.Y.A, M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and voila, podcast will be there. I'm assuming by now, if you are listening to the show on Facebook, then you found me, you've gotten social with me, but you can always find me on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai, and of course, on Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents. That's all the ways that you can connect with M.A.Y.A to do the show. So of course, I'm welcoming everybody. As you know, we're obviously almost to the weekend. We're in the midst of, what should be cooler weather for most of us, so to speak. So thank you for everyone who's tuning in. Hello, Vernon Fairley. And just like Vernon here, if you want to get engaged or participate in the show, you can always post a comment, whether it's on Facebook or it's on YouTube, and I can then share your comments with the rest of the viewers. So that's how you can get interactive with the show if you want to say something absolutely brilliant. So thank you for weighing in and saying hello. I appreciate it. So like I said, remember, that's how you can get social with me. You can always reply to any comments on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, all that good stuff. With that being said, before we jump into episode 19, I started my new live music segment, which I'm excited about. We didn't have last week because it was Thanksgiving, so I had to kind of suffer through it without Miriam. But without further ado, she is back into the saddle and ready to participate in the show. And
Hi.
boy, Miriam McQueen, you go for 1 week and you come back like fabulous. Okay, so you went from being a brunette to a blonde. What did we miss in the process?
Nothing. That's about it. Just like the mental barrier of going from a dark brunette to a bright blonde is a huge thing. So there we go. That's it. I don't know if I've gone crazy, but I was like, what? I'm tired of just having regular hair. And I'm usually so protective over my hair that I wanted to do something a little crazy with it. Because, it grows back. So it's fine.
I mean, that's true. Look, changing your hair color is one small way to kind of, I guess you can say, kind of reinvent yourself. And it never seems to fail that most people who have dark hair, at some point, they tend to go lighter, whether it's blonde or something else. So I think that's at least for women, and some men do it too. I think that's kind of a norm. You kind of want to change up your look. And now it's everything from, you can have eyelashes from a foot out to
that's true.
A little too much for me personally, but hey, to each his own. Same. But the hair thing is a way that people can really kind of mix it up. You can cut your hair. Now you can do extensions. You can do braids. I mean, there's so many ways. If you're just feeling like you want to do something different. I have a friend who's the queen of wigs. So, on
Love
any given
that.
day,
Love that.
I think it's great. It's like you can change your look without overcommitting to anything. So,
Mhm.
um, I'm not one that can wear a wig because I have like a hot head, and so I would like burst into
Uh,
flames. Yeah, so
yeah, they're rough.
they're rough, but there are some people who have perfected
Yeah.
it. So, well, I'm
Mhm.
loving the blonde hair. How are you feeling? How are you faring through the pandemic? Obviously, we're in the midst of it. But we're getting to
Yeah.
holidays. This is Christmas holidays. Does that kind of lift you up a bit?
It does. I love Christmas is my favorite holiday, but I remember last time we talked, we were discussing how, things haven't changed too much in Colorado, but now we're really basically going towards a lockdown because, the restaurant that I work at now can't do any dine-in, and it's just doing to-goes, and we were being able like, just a day or 2 ago, we were able to do dine-ins. Oh, so things are definitely changing.
Okay. Well, it sounds like that's happening around the country. If you watch the news, California is pretty much there. So it seems like it's happening.
Yeah.
We'll see how
Yeah.
it all goes. All right. Well, obviously, I will see you on the back end of the show. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to hear what song you're going to tie in with today's theme. I'm sure it will be good as always. So we will see you in a bit. All right,
Alright,
everybody.
see
So
ya.
that's Miriam McQueen. She is my musical muse. She does the live performance piece of my show. She's going to be back at the back end of the show, like the last 15 minutes. We'll chat and she will perform a song. Remember, she does her own original work or she does covers that ties in with the theme of the show. Make sure you follow Miriam. You can always find her at miriammcqueen.com as her website. And anywhere, if she's on Facebook, IG, Twitter, it's her name. So it's pretty easy to find her and check out her work. Some good stuff. So go check her out. YouTube channel, Miriam McQueen. All right. So with that being said, let's jump into episode 19. Putting your relationships into perspective. Oh. Now, as always with every show, what do I always say? It's toolbox time. It's imperative, as with every single show, that you reach in your toolbox and you take out your emotional intelligence, which hopefully you have out of your toolbox more frequently than not, so to speak. Remember, your EI refers to your ability to perceive, control, and evaluate emotions. Well, God, we know that within relationships, emotions are the blueprint of how we tend to function and make decisions about relationships, whether they're healthy or toxic. So this is why making sure you take your EI out your toolbox when we're talking about this, because I guarantee you there's going to be something I'm going to say that's going to prompt a thought you have about some relationship you've had or that you're in. One of the best memes I've seen on Facebook thus far is 2020 is still better than my ex-wife. Thought that was kind of comical, personally. That says a lot about that marriage, so to speak. So put your EI on the table, think open-mindedly, and let's progress and talk about episode 19, putting your relationship into perspective. Now, with that being said, you know me, I'm always about getting to the basics of things. What constitutes a relationship? And then you're probably like, well, Maya, I always think it's important when we have these conversations to really put things into framework, to define them so that they make sense for us as we talk about them. And as we talk about relationships, interesting enough, there's actually 3 different definitions that exist. The first one, and you can Google this, you're going to find the same thing. I take it exactly from, Webster's dictionary online. I don't modify it. 1, the way in which 2 or more concepts, objects, or people are connected, or the state of being connected. If anything within that definition, the word connected is so key. And if you listen to last week's episode, connectivity was a big part of what we talked about. So we're building on it without trying to build on it. So if you take anything away from definition 1, it's the state of being connected. That's key. Another definition that's being offered: the way in which 2 or more people or organizations regard and behave towards each other. So this would kind of take and say, if you're stepping outside of that personal or private relationships, it kind of makes it broader, so to speak. And then the third definition is the one that's probably the most intimate, so to speak: an emotional or sexual association between 2 people. Now, mind you, for my creative-minded people, they may say 2, 3, or 4 people. Because if you happen to believe in polygamy, obviously this definition has to be a bit more flexible. But you get the basic idea of what a relationship is supposed to be. It's about the connection, the relationship, the relation you have with someone else, an object, things of that nature. So we always work from basics when we talk about things. Now, if you listened to some earlier episodes, I can't even think about which episode this is. It's way before maybe 5. So it might be episode 1 or 2 where I talked about there are those relationship realms that exist for you. That's that personal relationship realm. And that's a relationship that you have with yourself. And yes, you do have one. And you should have a good one. And if you don't, that's why you're here working on the best version of yourself. That's the first thing. So it's just that personal it's upfront, it's personal, it's you. The private is something I tend to kind of remove out because I wanted to create a space when I talk about these relationship realms where there's just a realm that's only about you. And that's why I took and made the private relationship realm, because most people would think it could be personal. And that's when you get into friends, very, very close friends, family, that's mom, dad, sisters and brothers, cousins, your children, private, up close relationships. And then those professional relationships that exist. And that's obviously your place of employment. You may be self-employed. It could be your boss. It could be peers, fellow coworkers. Maybe you manage people. Maybe it's business associates you have. But those are relationship dynamics you have with people that don't fall into obviously that private realm. 2 different types. And occasionally, for some people, there could be some crossover. You may have started and met someone at work who became a really close friend to you, and you would put them into that private realm. There might be a person who in your private realm, you helped to get a gainful employment where you work. So now they kind of have a coexisting relationship with you. And it could be maybe a peer or coworker, whatever. Those are always interesting situations when you have crossover relationships, but that would be a different episode. We're talking more about really understanding relationships, so to speak. So in our last episode, we talked about core values, which is so important. And relationships should reflect your values, your core values. And remember, if you go to M.A.Y.A, if you go to the podcast resource section, because I always give some supplemental things for you to explore the conversation and do a little bit more in-depth kind of exploration. It talked about before you can really understand what the best version of yourself is, you kind of have to know what exactly do you connect and stand for. And remember, that list of core values was very large. Sometimes it could be family, it might be work, it might be your personal. A large core value for you is integrity. It's a very long list that probably had things on it that most people wouldn't think would be part of core values. But at the heart of it all, it's the things that mean the most to you, that you feel you would never want to compromise. In essence, it's the things that drive you. Core values should drive your decision making. Alert, they tend not to all the time because we're human. And sometimes we can be compromised because situations may do that to us. So when you talk about relationships should reflect your values, well, here's some of the values we could talk about. Relationships, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, should encompass things like honesty, integrity, sincerity, respect, honor, politeness, tact, fairness, equality, acceptance, empathy. We had a whole show about empathy, accommodation, go figure, appreciation, tolerance, security, safety, communication, connection, and contact. This is just a list of what good relationships really should have several of these embodied within it. So as you're thinking about relationships, mind you, they may not all have them all the time, but it's important. And so then I would say to you, when you're looking at this list of what values should be really part of healthy relationships, and we're going to dabble a bit and talk about those toxic, dysfunctional relationships, because we all have been in them, experienced them, have some type of point of reference to them. You probably will look at this list and say, well, that situation was missing this, and this. But I would tell you, everything of value has cornerstones to them. And when you talk about specifically the values that should be incorporated, I would tell you, take it a step further and say, there are certain things specifically that really have to be present. And if they're absent, it's an issue. And you can't really deem something to be a healthy relationship. And those key components that really have to be there, 1, for you to figure out where your relationship stands, first, you have to identify that there is actually a relationship that's in play here. You'd be surprised how many people kind of loosely think of relationships, but they impact people so deeply often, but they don't really give it thought. So before you can determine if you think something is healthy or unhealthy, you first have to acknowledge and identify that it exists. Then you must evaluate it and say, well, based on my core values, this relationship is over here versus over here. And then that's when you can prioritize it. Because ultimately, when you understand relationships, the whole takeaway of this podcast is to be able to prioritize your relationships so that they work towards helping you be the best version of yourself, opposed to being a takeaway. If relationships are subtracting opposed to adding, that's a huge red flag. So relationships that have an absence of those healthy components, those core values that are important to you, you won't know it until you identify the relationship, you evaluate it, and then that's when you can prioritize it. So when we talk about that, what are the key components of a healthy relationship? We talked about core values, which are, things that you would want to see in your relationships that you think are important because they align with who you are. And we often say birds of a feather flock together. In most cases, they do. We tend to befriend or have relationships with people that we have things in common with or similar situations. But I always warn people very quickly, just because you have something in common with someone does not mean that you are actually compatible. Chew on that for a bit. Just because you have something in common with someone does not mean that you are compatible. Just because you have shared experiences with someone does not mean that it has to result in a relationship. And a lot of people think like that commonality should equate to us being able to be connected. Well, how many times have you been disconnected with people that you're actually related to? And what greater commonality should there be beyond actually being related to someone? So I wanted to give you a framework to think about, what are the key components of a healthy relationship? And there are 6 components that I personally feel are important, that they need to be present if you talk about a relationship even having a semblance or a resemblance of healthy. It's important that your relationships have accountability, safety, honesty, support, cooperation, and trust, in no specific order. So as I say these, it doesn't mean that accountability is more important than trust. They're going to be equally yoked. And depending on the nature of the relationship you have with somebody, one may be more pronounced or more well-developed than others. So those are the 6 things that are key components that really have to exist in some degree within a healthy relationship: accountability, safety, honesty, support, cooperation, and trust. So as we talk about those things, let's break them down into a bit more detail. Let's flesh them out. Because remember, these are the things that you should be looking for in what are healthy relationships. And remember, a key thing that I just said is that they have to exist in some degree. And I will get to why the word degree is an important part of saying that. So when you talk about accountability, that means within your respective relationships. Now, mind you, these 6 things can exist in your personal relationship with yourself. Because believe it or not, accountability means when you take accountability for your own actions, it will roll over into your private and professional relationships. When you put yourself in a safe space and you don't put yourself at emotional and mental, physical danger, financial danger, that tends to matriculate into your other relationships. When you're honest about yourself, where you are and what you're doing, like it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to be the proverbial strong Black woman, or you don't have to be looked at as being the angry individual. Be honest. If you're angry, why are you angry? And get to the root of it. Support. Do you put yourself in a situation where support exists, or do you try to exist on an island and make it seem like you can accomplish everything on your own? Or do you open yourself up to getting the support that you need to fundamentally be happy on those key areas that we talked about in episode 1, which is that mental realm, that emotional realm, that physical realm, that spiritual realm, and even that financial realm? All those things play into your mental wellness. They impact you in some way. Are you actually cooperative with what you're trying to achieve with your life? You'd be surprised how many people self-sabotage themselves because they're not even cooperating with the things they need to do to maybe just be healthy. I'll give an example. I'm a person who knows they have high blood pressure, but they refuse to do what they're supposed to do in regards to taking their medicine or following up with their physicians or working out or eating healthy. Like, I don't feel like I should not do this. A person who has COPD but insists on smoking. That's not cooperation with self. And trust. Do you trust yourself that you can make the right decisions, even when it may make other people angry with you? So most people, in a lot of cases, don't make the correlation that these 6 things actually apply to you in that personal realm. It's the first relationship that's the most important relationship. I don't care if you got kids or a spouse. If it doesn't start with you, the relationships you have with others will always have something that seems to be a little off or debilitating, because you're often not working towards a position of making decisions that are balanced. So I wanted to make sure I pointed out how all these apply in every single relationship realm: personal, private, as well as professional. So accountability is pretty straightforward. It's accepting responsibility for your behaviors, your attitudes, and your values. That's it. When you do something you know it's not right, you don't try to circumvent it by making it seem like, well, but it really wasn't my fault. If you have a transgression against someone, own it. And it's okay to say maybe why something happened, but own that you offended someone or you made the wrong choice, and then proceed to move forward. But first, own it honestly. Don't try to sugarcoat it because you just really don't want to honestly accept that maybe your behavior, your attitudes, or your values were not good. And that's key. That'd be kind of like someone, I'll give an example, accountability. I've worked with people who, let's say early in their lives, they maybe weren't the best people in the world. They had a life of crime. I respect the people who flat out said, I made really bad choices, and for the longest time I was telling myself I made those choices because I said my cards that were dealt to me weren't fair. That might be true, but at the same time, I realized I could have it within my power to change my trajectory. But first, I had to own the fact that I was making choices that I wanted to make, and I was blaming it on circumstance. Someone might be like, Maya, I think you're being brutal right now. Well, if you're getting to the best version of yourself, you're going to be brutal with yourself and being honest. So I think accountability is very, very upfront. Then you get to the next one, safety. And this is key. It's making sure you're in relationships that have a nonviolent expression. They're not manipulative or intimidating. And it also means, from a personal perspective, that you're not that person that's aggressive with someone and manipulative and intimidating. That's where the flip side that is to that. So a healthy relationship, you should never feel like, if I don't do this, then they're going to be angry with me. Or that they are pushing you in a direction you don't want to go. You feel intimidated. Or they're physically violent. But here's one better. Violence can be emotional, it can be mental, and it can be verbal. It can even be financial. It could be that someone will only give you a certain budget to live because they're controlling everything. That's not safety. And we talk about domestic abuse. It's a really difficult cycle for a lot of people to break because of the mental shackles and the emotional shackles that they bear. It's not easy. And even though for those of us that have maybe a stronger constitution, and we say to ourselves, I clearly do not understand why you're still in this situation, because you have a different emotional and mental constitution, which is probably tied back to experiences that lend you not to allow yourself to be in situations that are not safe. So, honesty, acts, and communicating openly and truthfully. That's pretty straightforward. It's being able to say what you feel without being insulting to somebody else because you need to say it. But you should act. And here's a key thing about honesty, and even probably all of these. It's really about congruency. So if your words don't align with your actions or vice versa, that's always going to create a problem for people. So you can tell me that you love me or that you care about me. But if what you do is direct opposite of that, I'm going to have a hard time buying it, so to speak. So that congruency piece is huge when you talk about honesty. Support. Do you value or do you feel valued in your relationships? Like, is your opinion valued? Is there understanding to what you're going to and some flexibility? Is there encouragement? Like, hey, you know what? This may not be the best situation, but I got you. Don't worry about it. Go do you. Hey, everyone may not like it, but if this is what it takes to get to where you need to be, I got your back. And it's non-judgmental. That's the thing about support. Everybody makes mistakes. The key thing about it is when people support you, can they say, that was really just some jacked up stuff you just did, but let's talk about what happened and why you did it. And then they don't pigeonhole you as forever being the person that's going to behave or act that way. That's the key thing. And mind you, this exists in every single all your relationships. I don't care if it's your private relationships within families and friends, at work. All of these things should exist. And when you see an absence of them, you should wonder why that is. Cooperation. This is a key thing, especially in probably more romantic relationships, or even in family relationships, if you're caring for a parent, things of this nature. Joint decision making. The ability to compromise. That means in this situation, we're going to find balance in the compromise, which means it doesn't mean that it's all advantageous for me and you sit there feeling like, well, this didn't work for me. I don't like this. In a healthy relationship, you will find a way to strike a balance in your compromises so that it can be a win-win for everybody. And the key thing is not expecting anything. If you're dealing with somebody who always expects something from you opposed to asking for it, you have a problem, because that's very one-sided. And there's this idea that maybe you should always be accommodating to them without them being clear about maybe what their needs are, or if that accommodation actually works for you. And the one of these components that everybody talks about, obviously, in relationships is trust. Giving the benefit of the doubt and operating from face value until someone gives you a reason not to. Now, remember I said that these can exist in a degree? Because let's just be honest, when you first meet somebody and you're dating, these don't come out on 100. You have to have experience and get to know and learn and grow together. And as you grow, if you're progressing in the right direction, then these things will grow with you. And oh, by the way, you might have a stumbling block. You may have a situation that happens. And then, and I'm big on this, your most poignant growth will always be when you're challenged. If everything is always smooth sailing, you don't really grow. You tend to take things for granted. But the minute you get a hiccup in something and it challenges you in some way, maybe emotionally or mentally or whatever the case may be, it's how you kind of then work within these components. So if you're challenged, and let's say you do something that wasn't appropriate, can you be accountable for your actions to say, I got this, that was me, it hit a trigger, I didn't have my EI out the box, so now I acted out the box, and I'm feeling kind of stupid about it. You know what? That was very manipulative to me. I knew I had the upper hand. I should have never have done that. I wasn't being honest with you, because I felt if I was honest, that would create a problem in our relationship. How many times have you heard that? Well, if it's going to create a problem, let the problem be created so you can deal with it. And either you can work through it or choose not to work through it. Trying to stay in something that doesn't work doesn't make sense, but people do it all the time. So that's key things when I said there's varying degrees, and all of these things will develop over time. But to me, the one that should never, ever be negated is safety. You should never be in a violent situation at any point of time. You should never feel that you're being intimidated mentally or emotionally. You should never feel manipulated. Those are things that should never exist. And if it does, and you decide it's a one-time deal, you better make sure that that judgment call you're making is right, that it was very situational, and hence you don't feel that person that maybe you're still learning is not that person. Let's have another toolbox time. The second set of tools we're going to take out the box, and we're going to take them out pretty much for every show, is that whole thing about subjectivity and objectivity. Remember, subjectivity is based on personal opinions, interpretations, points of view, emotion, and judgment, being human, versus objectivity is fact-based, measurable, observable, it's driven by opinion or feeling. That's a maturity piece. As children, we're very subjective about everything. As we live in life, we learn to be able to harness objectivity if we're lucky. When you talk about relationships, it's so easy to operate from that position of subjectivity because you're like, well, what about me? But at the same time, that balance piece is important. I never want you to feel like you can't operate from a position of personal opinion or interpretation. Just remember, the last episode was about perspective versus perception. So make sure that when you're operating from a personal opinion, the caveat that it has to be, I feel this way because of this, and I know it's this experience that I had. That doesn't mean that that's what you're trying to do to me. It feels that way because I have an experience where my kind of past experience tells me I believe you're doing this to me, but maybe that's not absolutely right. So it doesn't mean that subjectivity doesn't have to be awful. It's what you do with it. Do you have enough emotional intelligence to know that you're operating solely from a position of subjectivity, which means maybe you're not fully seeing everything that you need to see. See, this is where that whole EI part steps in and helps you. So once we get past toolbox time, let's kind of have some real talk time too. Relationships evolve and change with common experiences that are created. But just know this. That means being created between you and that person that you have that respective relationship, whether it's business, your children grow up and mature, you learn that things change, they shift and they move. Relationships have movement to them. But past experiences and outside influences, other relationships, can directly impact your relationship. I'll give you a good example. For those of you who were kind enough to birth and bring children forth into this world, I only believe in, rearing, cats. And I think I've done a stellar job thus far. You probably have noticed you raise your child a certain way, right? And as they're going through the Erickson stages of, just trust versus mistrust, and they're growing and they're maturing, and they go out and they become school-age children, and all of a sudden, I've heard parents say, they went to school and they came back doing all this stuff that they never would do before because they were being influenced by outside relationships and watching behaviors by other children. And this continues through the lifespan. So you get to childhood, adolescence, and especially when kids get to those terrible teens where they're watching what their peers do. I've heard parents say, my child would never talk to me. I think they've lost their mind. I'm not sure what's happening. What's happening is they're having life experiences that are challenging them. It doesn't mean they won't revert back to where they came from, but they're growing and they're learning. So it's always going to be that other relationships can impact what's happening. Here's one better for married people. How many people can't say that if you're blessed and you have an absolutely great relationship with your in-laws, then wonderful. But how many of those people have that type of relationship or that marriage, if you're still in it, where your in-laws are little busybodies and they kind of create chaos within your relationship with your significant other? Because your significant other is impacted by the relationship he has with them that probably existed before you. So when I say that past experiences, whether it be a previous relationship where there's some baggage that a person struggles with and they swear they've unpacked, but don't realize they've unpacked it until they unpack it on you. You're like, whoa, I'm sorry. I really thought there was nothing in that bag. Cue up Erykah Badu on that one. Seriously. And it does happen. And you know what I call it when people's baggage all of a sudden pops open and they come out the trig bag on you and you're like, whoa. That is when your past intersects with your present. And it does happen. Where you think you have legitimately reconciled an emotion or a feeling on something and the person you're with does something, and maybe not even maliciously, but it triggers and elicits an emotion from you. And you're like, and you just all of a sudden just boom, you lose it, or you just cannot believe it, or you struggle with it. Your past throughout your life will intersect with your present. It's having the wherewithal to know within that relationship what's happening, and that you didn't fully unpack a bag that you thought you didn't have anymore. Or within that bag were those dirty underwear you thought you had taken out and washed from your last trip, but you didn't. Always check your luggage when you get home. Empty it out on the bed so you don't leave no dirty stuff in there for nobody else. Nobody likes dirty laundry. Cue up Don Henley on that one. Okay, so something else I want you to take in mind about real talk, and this too, is that every situation does not mean you have to connect at the highest level with an individual's issue. And that's the interesting thing about relationships. Maybe you can't connect every time with what someone says is going on with them, but this is where that piece about sympathy versus empathy we talked about. In the beginning of the relationship, maybe you don't know that person well enough to be able to bridge that gap. But as you grow with them and you grow closer because the connectivity grows, that degree that you can actually understand them better, it grows. So remember, the person you might initially fall in love with, and we're always very in tune with infatuation in the beginning. I like this, I like that. Eventually you get to know that person, and hopefully you've really fallen in love with the salient pieces of them. I'm gonna tell you something. This happens in family dynamics. I have a friend right now that I'm not her therapist, but we have very therapist-like conversations, who literally has a daughter that she's a little monster. She's 28 and she's a little monster. But she created a little monster because she worked so hard when she got divorced. She didn't want her to suffer, and she just absolutely gave her too much control of her. And she was disrespectful as an adult. She's disrespectful. She's rude, very manipulative, intimidating. And this is that woman's daughter. And this is where you talk about relationship prioritizing. We're going to get to that in a bit. What do you do when you feel like you have a relationship that legitimately for you has priority, but yet it's toxic? We've all been there. Now, when you should be concerned with if a relationship is unhealthy or toxic, which I just kind of gave you an example, or versus are you stuck or stagnant? There's some things you should look for. Here's some relationship red flags, and I couldn't help it. I got to put it out there because I think it's worthy. Warning, Will Robinson, warning. Because there are some things that you should be in tune to, whether it's in personal behaviors of yourself and how you're interacting with yourself in that relationship, rather it's those private relationships with family, friends, whatever the case may be, or there's something going on at work, there are always red flags. And folks, how many times have we actually said, I saw those red flags and I ignored them, only to now have to deal with the consequences of not having the courage to look at that red flag and say, oh, I need to get rid of that because that's dangerous. And I know that that's dangerous. So there's some things that you should be aware of. The warnings or the indicators suggesting there is a potential problem or threat against your relationship, no matter what that relationship dynamic or realm is. Some things that you should be in tune with is, for instance, ruminating and obsessing. And this is true for yourself. Do you find you get into a situation and you can't let it go? Or with significant others or even your kids, something happens, you think you've talked about it, and then an argument happens about a whole different situation, and here you go back there again. That's why it's always important to resolve issues as they exist. Otherwise, they fester and grow and create more problems. You obsess and ruminate over something if you don't address them. Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells? So are you at work and you're like, I don't feel like I can do anything right because my boss is like this? Or with my significant other, if I do this wrong, it's going to be a problem. Or if I don't do this for my children, it's going to be an issue. Or if I don't do this with my parents, I'm going to be judged for it. 3, do you feel guilty about everything? If every decision you make about you, you feel guilty because it wasn't best for somebody else, you need to go back to the drawing board, because it's a known fact that you are going to have to make decisions that are better for you than others. Everything can't be for the greater good as long as you're not creating absolute danger and harm to others. You may have to do something that, for honest, maybe someone in your family doesn't care for because it's an important thing that you need to accomplish. If you're always fighting and disagreeing, now, mind you, fighting and disagreeing have an important part in relationships. It's when you can figure out where you're not seeing eye to eye about stuff, and then you can work on fixing it and you can grow. But if every single thing within your relationship, even with yourself, if you're always like disagreeing with your own decisions, it's not healthy. And you got to work on that. Manipulating and controlling of behaviors. If you're dealing with somebody that is always trying to tell you what to do and how to do it, and what you do is never good enough, whether that's at work or in those private relationships, that's a problem. Or if you're always manipulating yourself to do things because it's going to be better for others than it is for you, that's an even bigger problem. Because what did I tell you? That personal relationship is the most important relationship that you have, the relationship with your health. When you're solid with yourself, you will be amazing with others. The other piece, and probably the main one, is when you get tons of yelling and insulting. Like, you can disagree without it turning ugly or rude or disrespectful. But when you got a person who can't do that, they feel like they got to be insulting all the time, that's a cue that might not be a person who's good for you. And then rounding it out, obviously disrespect is just that. Dishonesty is just that. If it's a pattern of behavior that consistently happens and you keep making excuses for it, shame on you. Then you're setting yourself up for the pain and misery and failure that constantly probably plagues your relationship. And of course, if anything is ever physical injury, it's never okay. But you have a lot of people that accept abuse and often will convince themselves that somehow it's their fault that the abuse happens. Domestic violence is one of the most difficult things to work with people on because you're trying to help them find themselves without feeling guilty. And it's difficult. And of course, the last one, a lack of self-care. I'm going to tell you something. It is hard to legitimately care for yourself when you're busy trying to care for everyone else. You put your needs to the back burner because it's easy to ignore because, you know what? You convince yourself that I'm taking care of someone else, so I'm doing something good. But in the meantime, you feel like you're wilting away. You're not giving yourself that oxygen. Flames burn under oxygen. You will never burn your brightest if somehow you're surrounding yourself with people who can't let you breathe. It's never healthy. So how can you prioritize relationships? What should you be looking for? And I just talked about the situation, obviously, with the person that I know that struggles. Well, relationships that you should legitimately want to prioritize should have these things, should kind of elicit this, or should be part of what you're trying to do. 1, it should express love or caring. It should create trust. You should feel like I can lean into you and it's healthy and it's good. That's a key thing. I can trust you. I can trust that I can be me and you're going to accept that. It exemplifies, or you have shared common values and beliefs. I'll be honest. Trying to align yourself with people who do not have similar belief systems often creates a problem. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be with people, but if you're too on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and by the way, opposites always attract. Oh my God. like hot and heavy. You can't wait to get to it, but you kind of know it's a train wreck about to happen if you're really too opposite in your values. So if you don't think, if I believe that integrity is really important and I appreciate family, and you kind of come from a background where family really wasn't all that important, we might have a ripple where I want you to be really engaged with my family and you just give me pushback because it isn't your experience. See, these are the questions and conversations that people never really have with people, that they get engaged in conversations. The same conversation can happen on the professional realm. When you're in an interview, you should not be afraid to ask your potential employer, tell me a bit about your employee culture. What do you think it's like? Describe it to me. And if you could change anything, what would it be? One, they're not ready for that question. That's the first thing. And if they don't know, it might give you a little bit of insight how disconnected that they are with their employee base. Just think about it. This permeates through everything. Common goals or interests, like I said, are very important. Remember, the values and beliefs are different than goals and interests. I may have a goal, for instance, that at some point I want to own a home. I want to retire at 52, whatever the case is. But if you're dealing with somebody that don't even want to work, to be honest, or their work ethic is different than yours, you might have a problem if you decide to really be together as significant others in achieving financial goals. How many times do we hear that money is a big issue within relationships? Because you know what? Those people often have different goals and interests when it comes to what they do with money. One person's a spender, the other person's a saver. One person wants to live like above their means, the other person doesn't want to do that. These are things you need to know about people before you overcommit. But you know what? When we get hot and heavy into things, we often will sacrifice the things that we need to know about people to make sure relationships can be healthy. Shared experiences are important, but what did I say earlier? Shared experiences does not equate commonality. It doesn't. So don't think for any reason that because we have shared experiences that we're going to always have things in common. But here's the bigger word, that we're going to be compatible. You know, I tell those people this all the time. All Black people are not homogenous. Just because somebody also happens to be Black doesn't mean we have the same interests and backgrounds. But you know, there's this idea that people of shared cultures that, oh, well, you must all like the same thing. No, what? I don't even know that person. I understand that we share a cultural thing or a racial thing in common, but what makes you think I know anything about Shaniqua? Besides the fact that her name might be Shaniqua. We often make this, we assume that you came from a single parent home. I came from a single parent home, or I'm divorced and you're divorced. We assume those kind of things that can kind of put us in the same plane because we have similar experiences. Sometimes similar experiences can be a detriment to healthy relationships. Maybe sometimes you don't want to have the exact same past experiences. But if they're good, healthy, shared things, that's good. You want to look for shared experiences that are positive and healthy versus those that are toxic and negative. So, you know, if you were in a domestic situation and I was a domestic situation, it may not be the best fit, because have we really resolved the pain and the suffering that we have? And will we bring that baggage to that relationship? It's interesting. And of course, the power to provide positive influences. Relationships that bring positivity in is what you want. If it's toxic, you should be running from it. You know, what's really key, and people don't get this, if you're in a relationship and it subtracts from your happiness and progress versus adding, you might want to get rid of that. Now, here's the difference. It's complicated often when those relationships, let's say, are family-based, because people often have a strong obligation that they have to deal with their family when they're arses. I'm just the opposite. I will cut you loose and not think twice about it. If you legitimately are trying to bring me pain, grief, and unhappiness, and we've talked about it, I do not feel obligated to have to stick with you and hang it out and make it work. No. Now, you might have a relationship like my friend and her daughter that you're just not going to excommunicate your child. I get it. I wouldn't excommunicate my cat, even though I'm thinking about it because she keeps scratching my couch. But I'm going to work through that. When you have relationships that you feel that you need because you love someone, you love your child, even if they're not the best person to you, those are the relationships you have to learn to reduce the amount of control they have over how you feel, which is work. It means really digging deep. And you kind of hold them to a distance. But more importantly, you've come to understand the kind of person that they are. So you see their manipulation, you see their intimidation, you see the fact that they're not being compromising or cooperative. You see there's no accountability. So when you know what you're working with, here's the biggest thing. Never put big expectations when you're dealing with a low expectation person. So hence, then they can't disappoint you. Because when you know who a person is, and these are those relationships you feel like you got to keep, because it's like maybe a parent which I don't feel like you always got to keep everybody around. That's just me. But I'm like, kind of a little bit, I'm about ascension into happiness. But I'll talk to you about something before we can't get it right. But if you don't listen, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. So you think I just have to do this? No. So if you feel you have that relationship you must keep, then give yourself conditions of keeping. That you will not have expectations that they will love you the way that you need to be loved, but you want them in your life because maybe you have grandchildren that you want to see. Just know who you're dealing with and never expect more than they've ever shown you, because if what they say and what they do they're not congruent, then don't allow yourself to be put on this emotional island expecting that it should be better. What you see is what you get, even from people that you love that maybe are part of your family. Families are always the best people. Let's be honest. And I understand those need to keep those relationships close to us are there, but sometimes that proximity, that emotional proximity, you need to create for yourself and not beat yourself up because they're not giving you what you need. Because sometimes people just can't do it. I always say, and it's true, people only love you the way they know how. And then what you have to tell yourself is, maybe I'm not being loved the way I want because legitimately this person isn't really happy. But I'm not going to keep creating excuses for them. Like, they're under stress right now. That doesn't mean you get to mistreat someone because you're under stressed. You're in a bad situation. You're depressed. If I'm trying to work with you, but yet you keep dumping on me, I'm going to tell you you're dumping on me. And then if you keep doing it, I'm going to back away. People struggle with that. And that's why so many people stay like in toxic relationships. So final food for thought. All relationships are not created equal. That means, you know what? You may be closer to one parent than another. Yes, there is the truth that sometimes you love one child more than the other. That doesn't mean you don't love them, but maybe you just have a different connection with people and you connect for different reasons. Remember, relationships are about connectivity. So they're not all created equal. You may have that child that calls you all the time and wants to be involved versus one that doesn't. Don't think everything has to be equally presented in regards to your relationships. It's about you treating people the way that's right based on the relationship that you have. All relationships are not meant to last forever. And people assume that. I'm not referring necessarily to about a divorce, but sometimes we lose people and we have to be prepared for that. For me personally, I ended friendships that I was friends with people for 20 years because I realized that our relationship had changed and it had been changing for a while. And it had gotten to the point where something of disrespect happened. And I said, if you were really my friend, you never would have treated me that way. But here's the difference. Once I got past the fact that those people hurt me, what was key is I have no ill will. I wish them well. I wish them happiness, because that's the key thing about being the best version of yourself. That growth point is you don't hover in negativity. You're not bitter. Remember, one of the things was about ruminating, how that's a bad thing. Don't ruminate with yourself. No one has a monopoly on your commitment to them. Just know that. No one can say, I feel like you owe me anything. I don't owe you nothing. Never feel you owe anybody anything. Don't be guilted into thinking you have to stay in relationships or do certain things because no one has a monopoly on you. If a relationship is not working from a position of reciprocity, you got a problem. And what reciprocity means is I give, you give, and it's such balance that I never have to take because we flow in concert with each other. That's final thoughts. All right, everybody. This is episode 19, Understanding Relationships. And hopefully you've gotten some nuggets from this and you can be ready to prioritize them. But now we got to get to wrap this up with Miriam. I can't wait to hear what song we're going to be hearing that kind of ties into this. God knows there's probably a wealth of them. So Miriam, thoughts on this episode topic?
I love it. You're so smart. Like, you amaze me every time. Every time I watch your stuff, I'm like, oh my goodness.
My mother would agree.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. You're just so, I'm just amazed every time. I'm like, why is she so smart?
Oh, it's the therapist in me. Out of fairness, it is.
Oh,
it is.
I love it.
So as you go through school for therapy, you grow, you learn.
Yeah.
And all therapists are told to be in therapy. So you're always growing. It doesn't mean you get it right all the time, but you're always working towards being the better version of yourself as you work with other people. So tell me, what song are we singing?
We're singing "The Cure" by Lady Gaga.
I don't know that I know this one.
I don't think a lot of people do. It's how do you say, like, underappreciated, I would say.
There's always those songs
underrated. Yeah, I would say it's underrated.
There's always those songs that people have recorded on their albums that maybe you just never get to, and then you hear it and be like, I can't believe this song wasn't a hit or it didn't get more play. So now I'm excited. All right, everybody. This is Miriam McQueen. This is my musical muse for the show. She's tying in a song that kind of expresses what the topic was about.
Yes.
Miriam, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll undress you 'cause you're tired, cover you as you desire. When you fall asleep inside my arms, I may not have the fancy things, but I'll give you everything you could ever want. It's in my arms. So baby, tell me yes, and I will give you everything. So baby, tell me yes, and I will be all yours tonight. So baby, tell me yes, and I will give you everything. I will be right by your side. If I can't find the cure, I'll fix you with my love. No matter what you know, I'll fix you with my love. And if you say you're okay, I'm gonna heal you anyway. Promise I'll always be there. Promise I'll be the cure. Rub your feet, your hands, your legs. Let me take care of it, babe. Close your eyes, I'll sing your favorite song. I wrote you this lullaby. Hush now, baby, don't you cry. Anything you want could not be wrong. So baby, tell me yes, and I will give you everything. So baby, tell me yes, and I will be all yours tonight. So baby, tell me yes, and I will give you everything. I will be right by your side. If I can't find the cure, I'll fix you with my love. No matter what you know, I'll fix you with my love. And if you say you're okay, I'm gonna heal you anyway. Promise I'll always be there. Promise I'll be the cure. Be the cure. I'll fix you with my love. I'll fix you with my love. If I can't find the cure, I'll fix you with my love. No matter what you know, I'll fix you with my love. And if you say you're okay, I'm gonna heal you anyway. Promise I'll always be there. Promise I'll be the cure. Be the cure.
Well, of course, I'm just speechless at this point. Again, I love it. Great song. You know what? And it's so Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
She really has such a range of music.
Yeah, and her vocals kill it.
Yes. I think people probably really started to appreciate her in A Star Is Born because you got to really see how talented that she really is. When you get past like Poker Face, it's like those early songs.
I love Poker Face.
I still love it though. I still love all her pop stuff. I do.
Yeah.
But her range and variety and just her story is unique too. She's a very passionate person.
Yeah, she's my muse. I love her.
Yes,
she's my favorite. So she's one of my favorites. I have so many favorites.
Oh, that's great. You don't have to have one favorite.
That's true.
The world wants you to believe you have to have one favorite, but it doesn't work that way. You can have as many favorites as you want. That's what I always tell people.
You're so right.
I mean, we live in a world where people constantly want us to compromise all the time. So if I like this, why can't I like that? And see, this is exactly why people are so polarized. because they believe that we have to make this hard and fast decision on one thing. It's like, no, if you like this, you can also like this too. It's no harm, no foul.
Yeah.
So. But yes, I love that song. It connects with relationships, and that I hear that's a person who's hitting on all 6 of those things right there.
Yes.
It's like that kind of evolution of kindness and wanting to be there from somebody. That's the kind of response you want from somebody that, hey, maybe I can't find the exact thing that's going to fix you, but I'm going to use what I have as much as I can to help you be in a better place.
Yes.
So yes. Very, very good. I love it. So now I'm like, so Miriam comes on. She has gone from a brunette to a blonde. So now I'm like, and that wasn't a week. So I'm like, I was like, well, what's going to happen next week? I mean, what's going to be different next week?
Who knows? Blonde eyebrows. Could you imagine?
No, don't do that. No, don't do that. Because you know what's weird is I didn't even notice that your eyebrows were actually dark. That's the weird thing.
Yeah,
I didn't notice it.
It looks right,
It looks right, and if you dye them, then they won't look right. It's like when people draw them in too much and they don't look right.
Yeah, you're like, you can't stop looking up at the eyebrows, but you're trying not to.
A couple things that it can never be right is when people's eyebrows are like way too pronounced, the wrong color, and then when people's spray tan is really like not tan. It's like, you do realize that's like a slight shade of orange, right? And nobody tans like that.
Like, nobody tans like that.
It's like you escaped out of a Dr. Seuss book. I don't get it, but hey, it's not for me to judge of that. So looks like people are sharing some stuff as we wrap up the show. Optimus Ravi. Yesterday I watched a podcast where the dating coach said girls should only date men with money. Focus on the wallet instead of his heart. This way you are telling him that you are worthy of his time and he is worthy of your attention.
I mean,
okay.
I mean, it can go both ways though. Like, it depends on what you're after though.
Okay, so we have a little time that we can dive into this. We got a couple minutes. Here's the thing about that. I am never going to tell somebody, if that is what your dating purpose is in life, that's your business. The thing is, if a man knows up front that a woman, that's what she wants and he entertains that, then that's his choice. Now, my thing is, how in tune is he with finding someone who loves him for who he is? We live in a world where people make decisions and they know people are not sincere. And let's be honest, we see a lot of relationships where clearly we know they're money driven. Yeah. It's not my place to tell someone it's right or wrong. I would never tell someone that. Now, I will tell you this, Optimus Ravi, you shouldn't date nobody broke. Because broke ain't no joke, and broke can create a lot of issues. And I can speak to experience because I had a time where I dated all kinds of people. It had nothing to do with money, this and that. And it was just like, money creates stress if there's too much or not enough. And I found in those situations that because I was doing better than them, it created a lot of angst for them. So my thing is, you have to find a person you connect with. And here's the thing. If she's materialistic, chances are he might be materialistic too. So you date based on what works for you. That's the whole thing about this relationship factor. If you're materialistic, don't date someone who's not. It's probably not a good fit. So it's not for me to judge, but broke is never good either.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because you know what? If you were to wind and go back in time, culturally, we were a society where women were supposed to marry for money. But this is obviously before we left the home, and so a man was supposed to be the provider. See, that's a whole nother conversation right there. Understanding that dynamic within your relationship about provider versus, what's your role? Are we traditional role people? Those are conversations that really people should have, because if you don't, it's going to cause a lot of issues down the road. And I don't think people realize that you just can't assume that someone wants to take care of you. I don't know. All right, Miriam. Until next time, I've enjoyed. Thank you for sharing.
This was fantastic. Thank you.
I'm waiting to see next week what we're doing. I'm waiting for some other element of surprise. Right? She's like, now I got to start thinking about this. What am I going to do? All right. Listen, everybody, I know it's scrolling on the screen, but it's always good to hear you say it. How can people find you?
Follow me on Facebook and IG at Miriam McQueen. Visit my website at www.miriammcqueen.com. You can basically type my name into Google. I'm the only one, and you'll be able to find me.
There you go. That's
Yes.
not bad. That's good. That's great. You know what? That's great marketing because you know what?
Yeah.
There's no doubt it's not like some variation of your name. So that's
Yeah.
good. All right. We will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Of course, she is always awesome. So make sure you check out her work. Like I said, she does original stuff as well as covers. Great stuff. She is my musical muse lover having on. Well, guys, thank you for listening to this episode of Maya. As I said, the whole purpose of this podcast is to help you to identify your ambitions, harness your motivation, to help you acquire the success and satisfaction you seek in your life. So remember, episodes can always be found at MA.A. That's always my preference or where you look from them. Of course, you can always find my episodes. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, M.A.Y.A. If you happen to have a podcast platform of choice, then I will not give you a hard time about it. You can go listen that way as well. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and now on Amazon Audibles as well. Remember, every episode has a podcast companion. It's not there yet. Give me like 30 minutes. You know, I kind of work behind the 8 ball a little bit sometimes. Supplemental information I think that'd be great to share as part of this episode to kind of give you some deeper thinking. So you can always go and check that out as well. Like I said, MA.A, go to the podcast resource section and boom, there will be some extra episode information for episode 19, Understanding Relationships, hopefully how to utilize them and prioritize them to help you to get to the best version of yourself. All right, everybody, that is it for me. Until next week, I'll see you next Thursday. Remember, your present becomes your past and your future is no more. So live every single day to the fullest. All right, everybody. Ciao. I'm out of here.
Get inspired. Get motivated with M.A.Y.A, the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking, thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at MA.A.Akai.com.